You're watching the legal breakdown. So Glenn, this is the news that I think everybody expected here. The judge is already on day 2 of Trump's criminal trial in New York, issued a warning to Donald Trump in the courtroom. But first, I would just remind folks who are watching this right now, Glenn and I are going to be doing comprehensive coverage of the entirety of Trump's trial here. So if you're not yet subscribed to our channels, please make sure to subscribe. The links on this screen, and also in the post description of this video. This way you can follow along with everything that happens as soon as it does happen. So Glenn, I want to direct your attention to a tweet from Adam Klasfeld. When Trump's lawyer questioned a juror about Facebook posts, the former president reacted audibly and visibly after she leaves, meaning the juror. Judge Marchand angrily warns him via his lawyer, "I will not have any jurors intimidated in this courtroom." I want to make that crystal clear. Glenn, what's your reaction to that? My reaction is, first of all, I am glad Judge Marchand is taking the big orange bull by the horns and making sure he doesn't misbehave. He doesn't act out. He doesn't do anything that could intimidate the jurors in the case. We already know he has been posting and saying things that are designed to intimidate the witnesses in the case. That's why he is pending a contempt charge. We're going to know soon if he will be held in contempt, fined and/or jailed. So stay tuned for that. But now what we have is, during jury selection, which is usually a pretty solemn affair, we have Donald Trump saying or doing something. We don't know precisely what, but we know that judgment. Sean interpreted the look and the sound or the noise, or the gesture, Donald Trump was making as being designed to intimidate, because you can hear in the words. Judge Marchand chose when he saw what Donald Trump did, heard what Donald Trump said or the noise he made and how he reacted, was, "I will not have you intimidate the jurors." I mean, that is a pretty strong admonition coming from the court, and it is a pretty clear sign that what Donald Trump is doing in the courtroom is designed to, and perhaps even likely to, intimidate jurors. That is not a good thing for anybody. Most pointedly, it's not a good thing for Donald Trump because, Brian, I prosecuted a lot of folks who were charged with horrendous crimes. I don't say I prosecuted a lot of bad, horrendous people, even though some of them were, but I prosecuted a lot of people who I think, based on what they did, presented a real danger to the community, to the victim, to society, and jurors watched every single thing the defendant did in court, even if the defendant chose not to testify, exercised his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. Throughout the trial, they were absorbing important information about the defendant, and if they perceive that the defendant is acting up, misbehaving, trying to intimidate, in my experience, it backfires. Jurors are not going to be intimidated into saying, "You know what, I believe the evidence proves guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, but I'm kind of scared of the defendant, based on how he was acting in court, so I'm going to vote not guilty." But what I do think a definite like Donald Trump runs the risk of is having jurors say, "This is a closed case, but I saw what a fool that defendant, that man was. I saw him mugging. I saw him," we have a term that I'm trying not to use, because it's really profane, "I saw him shooting death glances." I'm gonna choose that one instead, at the witnesses as they testified, as at audience members, and perhaps worst of all, 18 jurors, and I will not be intimidated, and I'm voting guilty, because the evidence proves him guilty. Donald Trump, I would say, is acting like a child, but that's an insult at children. But what he's doing will absolutely inure to his detriment. During the course of the trial, Glenn, Donald Trump is already contending with a possible contempt charge for violating his gag order because he's, invoked the names of at least 3 witnesses on his Truth Social posts. Could this possibly warrant yet another contempt charge, if he does intimidate with jurors' witnesses? That's a great question. So, there are 2 kinds of contempt, and we were talking about this in connection with the motion that Alvin Bragg just filed to have Donald Trump held in contempt and fined, and for the next contempt, jailed because of the stuff he's been posting on social media. But there are 2 kinds of contempt. One that happens in court, if Donald Trump does something that violates a court rule that he is on notice of, like don't intimidate jurors. That could be what's called summary contempt. There doesn't mean even have to be notice, and an opportunity to be heard. That could be judgment, Sean banging the gavel. If Donald Trump does something that is again designed to intimidate jurors, he could be held in contempt on the spot, he could be fined, and he could also be jailed for up to 30 days. I think Donald Trump's trouble is just getting started. Well, if we already kind of have the warning, Yet, yes, we haven't had this hearing. Yet, it happens on April 23rd, so that's next Tuesday, where we determine what the punishment is going to be for this first raft of violations of his gag order. But this kind of does feel like it's the first warning and already to Avon. Bragg has said, okay, let's just find him the statutory maximum, which is $1,000 a day per violation, and then the next fight raft of violations, the next tranche of violations, is going to include jail time. Could that mean that, like the warning already happened, even though we haven't had the hearing? And so then, if Trump does act out and intimidates any jurors, then that warning has already been done, and he can just go straight to jail. I think the warning has been delivered, formally and forcefully. I will not tolerate you intimidating witnesses in this case, right? Let's forget about the upcoming hearing on the 23rd. He's already gotten a warning from judgment on this issue of intimidating jurors. I would agree, and I don't think it has to be prefaced with, let me put you on notice that this is a formal warning that, if you intimidate witnesses again, you can be held in contempt. It is virtually a court order. Brian, when a judge says you will not do anything that intimidates witnesses, I will not stand for it, and that is what judgment and substance just said. That, I think, is an effective warning, that could be followed by a summary contempt with a bang of the gave. If Judge Marchand perceives that what Donald Trump did was designed to intimidate a juror, and of course, there's plenty of runway here, because jury selection has only just begun, and so there's plenty of time for Donald Trump to continue digging himself into this hole that he's already begun dug himself into. Glenn, why is Donald Trump in that room? The guy is the former president United States? Of course, his presence inherently is going to be intimidating to jurors. Of course, he can't even control himself beyond that. Why is he in that room? Because the defendant has a constitutional right to be present at every hearing in his case, and he has a right to be privy to everything that's being said in his case, and those are two slightly different things. Precedents that your trial is self-explanatory, but privy to everything that's being said. This actually came up yesterday, because there were times when the prosecutor and the defense would approach the bench. How many times have we seen that in the movies, when the judge would say to the parties approach the bench or sidebar, the prosecutor, the defense attorney, would walk up to the judge's bench, and there were things that were being said that couldn't be heard in the audience, and if a jury was in the box, couldn't be heard by the jury. I'll tell you, we have a white to judge has a white noise button, which we call the hush, at any time that we're up there, at the bench, talking with the judge, and the judge doesn't want anybody else in the courtroom to hear. The judge engages the husher, and then there is this white noise that fills the courtroom, so nobody can overhear what's going on up at the bench, but the defendant has a right to be privy to that conversation, and every conversation. I can tell you in the courts of D.C., Brian, the way we handle that is there is a headset that is at defense counsel table, and any time we went up to talk to the bench, the defendant would put the headset on, and could hear every word that we were saying. But not so in New York, apparently, because yesterday, it was reported that, when the prosecutor and the defense attorney walked up to the bench, Donald Trump would amble up to the benches. Well, and people were like, what does he get a special privilege here? The answer is no. He gets to hear. He gets to be privy to everything that's going on in his trial. Interestingly though, today, day 2, he's already apparently grown tired of ambling up to the bench, and today his attorney said he waives his right to hear what's going on up at the bench during these bench conferences. So apparently, Donald Trump has already a little too worn out to make his way the 20 feet up to the bench to hear what the judge and the attorneys are talking about. Unsurprising for a guy who has kind of made a name for himself, refusing to read his presidential daily briefs when he was president, and more recently, who has had a little bit of trouble staying awake in his own trial, in his own criminal trial, which for most people would be a jolt of ADR.